Hello, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Hello to everybody. Um, Welcome again. This is Zoe Sarbo with Across the Diaspora. I'm joining you on another Tuesday evening to have a conversation on a topic that has started earlier this week. Should I say last week? Yeah, Saturday started last week. So welcome. I'm gonna wait for a couple seconds for persons to join. Um, I will be doing things a little bit differently this evening. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I am excited, and not let me. I wouldn't say excited, but today is going to be another engaging discussion. I should have someone who's been on this show before joining me. She will be joining virtual, Miss Victoria Williams, to join me in having the conversation around the topic that we're discussing today. And so today we're talking about women and fashion, a topic that had started earlier this week. Um, and I took some time to really think about what was discussed, what was said, what was shared. I had to, regroup, step back a bit, and gather my thoughts based on what was said and what others have shared with me. And I thought that I would continue today. I would, continue with our topic today. So welcome everyone. Good evening. I set everything up myself. So our pod. This is a podcast room at AfriSoul Marketplace where I'm at, and the studio director. What do you even call him? So is not in town. Is on vacation, and I decided, you know what? I'm gonna figure this out on my own today. So please signal um, if I am not being heard, if I'm not being heard, I'm assuming that people can hear me. Um, and so I'm proud of myself that I was able to set everything up on my own. And so we're going to have a conversation tonight on fashion. Um, and so I'm really excited for those who are going to be joining. And as I said earlier, I will have a guest join me during the course of the discussion, and because I think she will be able to expand on a particular topic that I really think is important to discuss. Why is this important? I really haven't really spent much time talking about what I do with my life. Um, for for the most part, well, I've been an educator, right? I consider and I define myself as an educator, um, a social scientist. I really like that term. I observe what is going on in our larger society, particularly our communities, specifically the Black community, and I analyze and try to come with answers and understanding of what's happening. I identify myself as social scientist. I'm an educator. I like learning and asking questions and digging deep into topics that are important to me. But I'm also within the fashion industry. I have a clothing brand. I've been doing this since 2015, and so fashion, clothing, styles, the what people wear across the diaspora is very, very intriguing to me. As you may know, if you've been following me for some time, I've had a few discussions on fashion. I had a guest a few weeks ago who they recently had his an African. I say African inspired, right? Lagos PHX fashion show, and he was on my show, and we talked about African fashion and its place in our society today. So it kind of makes sense why I would ask a question that I had asked a couple of days ago, right? Because I've made an observation based on certain spaces that I visited. and noticed the way people were dressing. And so there was a certain consistency, right, in the type of clothing that's being worn. And um, it was a little surprising for me. Because I do design pieces, because I think of ways in which I can accessorize Western wear, right? I come up with ways of creating styles that is palatable to the Western taste, but has a touch of African touch to it. And so when I'm looking at what's being worn now, it gives me pause. And so, hence the question that I had asked. Um, and so the question I asked for those who were on, if you're on my Facebook page, I see a few people from YouTube on, but if you're my Facebook friend, you would have seen it by now. Just asking, the way in which young ladies are choosing to dress to be in public spaces. Now, my question um, was based on just genuine curiosity, right? It was really trying to understand which direction we're going as a culture when it comes to clothing and fashion, right? If anyone is aware of fashion, every period of time, there is a certain type of style that goes along with that time period. Um, and we know what the 90s look was like, we know what the 50s look was like, right, the 70s. And so in me studying what we're wearing and what is being considered as trendy fashion, right, based on social media, what certain celebrities wear, what certain fashion houses, no, Fashion Nova, right, what they're pushing, it forced me to ask that question: what does that mean, right? How does that represent our community, our society, but particularly women, right? How do we see ourselves? How does the larger society, how do men see us, right? And is that even relevant? And that's something I'm going to talk about some more later in the conversation. But this is the reason why I'm asking this question based on certain observation. And so in understanding that not only in certain time periods, right, we have different fashion styles, right, what is considered fashionable, but oh, I see Victoria. I'll join you and have you join in a second. We have different societies and different cultures that identify what is considered um, um, what was the word I'm looking for? What is considered acceptable for the women to wear, right? So me asking that question, I'm surprised. I was surprised as to the you're joining. I just added you as to the type of responses that I received, and not only during that live, but just in the comments, right, where people, I don't want to point out any individuals, because the majority of people who responded are my close friends, right? So, but it was quite alarming how they're like, yeah, I'm wear whatever I want to wear. It's my right, it's my freedom. I'll be go naked if I need to. Um, and for me, I find it alarming, and I find it alarming because of the context of the society that we live in, and I spoke about that and mentioned that in the live on Saturday. We are with the woman's body. How is the woman's body presented in this culture? Right? How is the woman's body received? And in popular culture, it is not received in a esteemed, elevated, respectable way, right? It is done in a very much over sexualized, denigrated way. And so it seems as though we have accepted that, we have normalized that, and then we're perpetuating it by the acceptance of what clothes we wear. What do I mean by say that? Um, if in certain spaces in the media, in popular culture, right, certain celebrities are wearing certain clothing and outfits, and then we go ahead and buy it, right? Is the message empowerment, or is it message the suggestive messages that these celebrities and musicians, and artists are presenting through the music, right? Um, and so I'm asking that question: how do we separate popular culture that sexualizes the woman's body? How do we separate that from your intention, the woman's intention of feeling empowered in that same outfit? I don't understand. And so I have my friend Victoria Williams. I asked her to join me pretty last minute, so I appreciate you. Thank you. Um, you look lovely, by the way.
Thank
But thank you
you.
for joining me to, have this conversation with me so that we can dig deeper, because I think it's absolutely important in having in this discussion. So I asked you to join because I realized that there was a white elephant in the room, right? That really is the overall reason for the way in which the conversation was happening a few days ago, right? And is that term of feminism, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think we were having a topic about what women should wear, um, without really acknowledging what the real issue is. And it's people, there's some groups of women who, are identifying themselves by the more feminist terminology, mindset, and ideology. And so certain questions, language, um, they may receive it as a push or an attack on that. And so I want you to, before I go too far into the conversation, is to help me to understand, or if you want to explain what feminism really, what is feminism in today's world, in today's society, um, and what's the connection based on the topic that we're talking about.
So when we talk about
One
feminism
second, one
from
second.
you,
So give me one second. I'm gonna have to. All right, let me hear. See if I can hear you now.
yeah, can you hear me?
Okay. Hmm,
Are you able to hear me?
1 second. All right. All right. Can you say something?
Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
So okay, let's see. Let's see. This is the same thing that happened the last time with America. Um, anything?
Can you hear me now? Are you able to hear me?
Nope, nope, nope.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there we go. It's like five different
Okay, there we go.
audio options, so I have to click around. All right, and so I made some changes. So those who are watching in the audience, please, if there are any problems, please let me know. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Again, I apologize for the echo. We just moved into the new house,
Oh,
so
congratulations! No problem.
random refrigerator behind me.
That's okay. That's
So,
okay.
when we talk about feminism, it's important to realize that the conversation around gender is not new. It's not within the last 300 years, 500 years. The conversation around gender is as old as cavemen because they did depict the separation between genders.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about the concept of feminism, we have to talk about what is the definition of femininity in womanhood. And because you can't talk about feminism without looking at the historical context from when humans as a whole started to separate genders and what those roles looked like. And so when we look at neo-feminism, which is what we see today, what we do know is feminism was beneficial in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Mm-hmm. We saw that with the suffragettes. We saw that with the advocacy for voting rights, for better presence across fields of study, for domestic violence laws being implemented, even down to financial, being able to own a credit card and have your own bank without having to ask your husband permission. But at the same time, there's still battles that are innately female. For example, in some states, you still have to have your husband's permission if you choose to have an abortion or to have your tubes tied. So that ownership of body is still in question today. Mm-hmm. However, the shift comes in where it's becoming more pronounced in terms of being white centric. And we knew this from the beginning, that there was this focus on white womanhood. And we saw that with the suffragettes. We saw that with Harriet Tubman and how it was depicted. And we saw that through the civil rights movement and how Black women, by and large, had to play the background of not only the Black movements, but also the feminist movements. Yeah. So when we define feminism, we have to understand that there is a spectrum as to what being woman is. Yeah. I think that the difference today is now it is no longer intersectional with anything. So when feminists present themselves as being feminist, it tends to be solely from the form of being woman. And it negates any other aspects, any other nuances, which is why we get introduced to terms like womanism. So we end up with conversations by like Audre Lorde that kind of adds into the depth of it, that it really is a grayscale. It's not singular. And for neo-feminism, it's this desire to take up space, which is awesome. Women should be taking up space. That is our desire, no matter if you're Asian an Asian woman, Hispanic woman, Black woman, or a white woman, you want to take up space. You want to be heard. But now feminism pushes into trying to dominate over other identities. And that becomes the issue. That is why there is a negative connotation when it comes to feminism, is because it's so, let's take up space, to the point where they start to drown out other voices without a care in the world.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So I'm glad you mentioned that, right? But I'll go back to, I want you to identify the difference between feminism and womanism, in that, Black women identify closely with the womanism part and not feminism. But in drowning out, so I just had a conversation with a colleague of mine here at AfriSoul, right? A male, right? Young man, wonderful young man, right? And so he was like, oh, so what are you talking about? Was your topic today? I'm like, it's kind of a touchy subject. And so I briefly explained to him the discussion that we had on Saturday. And, I told him, my point of view, and I'm going to be having this conversation today. And he's like, yes, he said, he said quite a few things about from the male perspective of how he feels about the way women dress. But what he felt, he says that he feels as though the male voice is irrelevant. He says that as a man, in trying to share how he feels and his opinions when it comes to the woman, it's like an attack. Right. And he feels as though, whatever is his point of view and his feelings in certain subjects, particularly when it comes to the woman, is not taken seriously or even listened to or considered at all. And if their opinion in any way differs from that of the woman, they're accused of being anti-woman, attacking the woman and her position and all of that. And so I just had to share that, because just 5 minutes ago, I had a conversation with a young man who was like, yeah, I'm all for feminism. I'm all for that. But I feel as though the man does not have a space in these conversations.
I do strongly feel that, particularly within the last 20 years, feminism has shifted towards being against dialogue. It is my way or the highway. I'm not going to
Mm,
yield. I'm not going to have the conversation. There's no need to have the conversation. But when we talk about something that is historical and global, you have to
yeah,
have a conversation.
yeah, yeah.
But when we talk about the comparison between feminism and womanism, one of the ways I explained it to a male friend of mine is feminism is engrossed with audacity. They operate from this viewpoint of wanting to be in line with the privileges of white males. And so
Mm,
they over assert themselves and they become incredibly audacious with it. Whereas with womanism, it is so many layers to it
yeah.
that you make room for other people. And I think that
Mhm.
feminism today does its best to eliminate any other voices that does not align with Eurocentric views on womanhood.
Yeah, and that is key. That is key because I feel as though there is a uniqueness in a black women's situation, of course, right, and the white woman's situation, right. And even in creating space during the time, we had our own space within our communities, right. We were not at that time really to that degree. Has it been only many tongues? Sorry, I got distracted by comments. Um, yes, so it's even in context with, in of the differences in the races. Because for me, when I'm speaking, because based on the work that I do in the community that I'm a part of, right, and the men that I speak to are black men, right, and so I'm observing women, and I want to touch more on the clothing parts, right? And how much out of line I may or may not be in asking certain questions, right? Because it's I'm used to being in a society where we have established standards, right? We have established values, right? Because in every space of society, we have values, and standards that guides us with which whatever space we're speaking of. And so when it comes to the woman, her body, and how she presents herself, where do we cross the line? And it seems as though that we are going in the direction where there's no space for decency. And I have my laptop here because I'm literally looking up the definition of these terms, right? Because I was told I was old fashioned. That was a term that I was accused of on Saturday. Oh, you're being old fashioned. Like, why are you asking these questions? And so the definition of the word decency is recognizing good taste, recognizing a standard of modesty, right? Morals, what does that mean? It's having rules or guidelines of the way we conduct ourselves, right? A distinction between what is right and a distinction between what is wrong. And so, are we going in a direction as a society, as a community, as women, where even asking that is stepping on the toes of feminism, and expecting too much? Is that where we're going, Victoria?
I don't feel like that's where we're going, but I based off of the comments that I saw, and I come from a different space because my day to day and my personal life is primarily white male,
Mm-hmm.
and but my college years and most of my life black male. So I've lived within the dynamics of understanding womanhood and femininity between those two very different concepts. And when we talk about standards and decency, I think that when we use the term standards and decency, people tend to immediately feel attacked when they feel like, oh, well, it's deferring from mine, so she's created this hierarchy. And I don't think that's what was meant in the question. I felt like your question lacked arrogance, while the responses to it was heavy in arrogance and wanting to push the idea of, well, I'll wear whatever I want, I don't care what anyone else says. The reality is we live in a society and you are around other people, and there are certain standards and expectations
Yeah.
of decency and self-dignity.
Yeah. Yeah.
I strongly believe that. However, do women have the right to wear wherever they want? Yeah, I mean, go out, do whatever you want. But however, you cannot project your expectations of other people to treat you the way that you want to be treated just because you say I can wear whatever I want. And that's just how, I mean, yes, that might be old fashioned, but when I go to work, the expectation is that I am dressed appropriately. Even if I go out to drink and have fun with my friends, I know that I have to wear underwear. I know that I have to cover myself up because the last thing I want to do, just health reasons, I'm not going to be sitting on a chair with everything just out. And for me, it extends beyond just the understanding of social standards. It's this idea that I'm the only person that matters.
It's very individualistic. It
Yeah.
is very individualistic, and that goes against who we are as Black people, right? Historically, right, and our nature, right, is taking into consideration the whole community. And so, if for me, it's okay, fine, you have the agency to pick whatever piece of clothing that you want to put on your body, sure, right? But then there is a respond well, and then he or she need to just deal with it and accept it and respect me the way I should be respected. And I think that is really, really audacious of us, right? Because as I said, what is the type of society that we live in? How do we, like, we are trained, we're trained through our culture that the woman is seen as this, as this up tool of object, right? And so then you put on these pieces of clothing and say, well, forget all of that, see me as the same way you want to see your mother and your grandmother, in that respectable way, right? And so I'm speaking now from the male's perspective of, it's confusing, right? Like, by their nature, they're going to respond to you in a less than ideal way, because certain things becomes triggered automatically when they see you dressed a certain way, presenting yourself a certain way. And this is where decency and self-respect comes in, right? What is the barometer, right, of what self-respect look like and decency? Do we have any way to measure that anymore?
I feel like we do. So I think that we have a unique perspective of coming from being educators. So we've dealt with dress codes and with then having to explain to literal children what is appropriate and what is not. And I think that because people tend to want to express themselves, and fashion tends to be the best way to be able to express yourselves, I think they have to ask themselves, what is your true intention and what is going to be the reception to that message that you are projecting with your body.
Yes,
That's not
exactly.
always, because I mean, I can admit I'm a very curvy person. So my relationship with clothing, as someone who developed really young, is that of I need to cover up because that's what's safe. And should little girls have to think that way? Absolutely not. Should they have to go and change their clothes because that creepy uncle walked into the home? Absolutely not. However, we have to create barriers and boundaries. And sometimes that comes in the form of our dress code and how we choose to present ourselves. One of the things that was really stark to me in the conversation in the comments was this idea that somehow when you wear whatever you want, you have ownership of who you are. But a lot of it seems to be attention grabbing. And what type of attention do you want? Are you someone who wants to be combative, so you wear something so someone looks at you so you can do the whole what are you looking at? Because some people do project themselves in that way. And I think that we also saw that what we tend to see with African American men in particular is this wanting to align with Eurocentric values. And so we saw women who were non-white arguing for the desire to dress however they want and go out with as little as possible because that's what other people do. And unfortunately for us, from a historical viewpoint, we haven't had ownership of our bodies. We haven't had ownership in how our hair is being perceived. We haven't had ownership in how our bodies are perceived. And so I think that in that reclaiming of who we are and redefining Black womanhood, fashion becomes central to it.
So we're using fashion to reclaim agency of our body, right? But where are we getting these ideas from? Like, where are we getting, for me, it's not coming out of, out of, what am I, the community. So let me change this way: natural hair, the embracing of natural hair, right? That did not come from popular culture, right? That is an organic movement where one day Black women just started deciding maybe the Chris Rock show, the movie, the documentary, good hair kind of triggered that. But all of a sudden, Black women, like, we're embracing our natural hair. We're going natural. We stop with the perm and all that stuff, right? That is organic. Like, that is natural. That is something I know that we claim and took ownership because we had pride in ourselves. What I'm seeing in fashion today is not coming from us.
Yeah.
It is reflected from popular culture. And so when we say it's or agency, it's like, well, how much is it really is coming from you really thinking it's your own empowerment, or is it another example of our culture being in being affected, touched on in some way by a larger system, right? Because fashion is not pushed by Black women or women in general. Trust me, right? The majority of fashion companies, fashion industries are run by men and gay men.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who make the decision.
By them. If it's not run by them, then it's at
Yes.
least financed.
Yes, financed by them, right? And so they're the ones who create these styles. They're the ones who put it on celebrities. They're the ones who put it on, in the music videos and the popular culture, right? They're the ones who are running these big websites like Fashion Nova or whatever, right? And then we see it, we think it's cute. Whoever we think we admire are wearing it, and we put it on, and we call it empowerment and agency. Right? And so for me, it's, if it didn't come from the community, how is it really empowerment and ownership, right?
Yeah.
It's like women rappers saying that they have free agency to sing whatever they want to say when the lyrics were written by men. It makes no sense. Like how is it really empowerment and agency, right? When it's created by someone that's outside of your community that doesn't look like you. These things are intentional, right? And so I'm looking at the comment that I had a conversation with one man. I have conversations with men all the time. And so I come to my position because I actually listen to men. I only shared this example because it was just a random conversation I had 5 minutes ago. But I actually listen to what men say, right? I pay attention to how they're responding to Black women. And there's a reason why Black men are losing respect for women. And so I have to ask a question, why? Right here in Arizona, I've given this example before. I have absolutely no desire of going to Black clubs, none whatsoever, because men do not have respect for women. Right? I only go to African Caribbean clubs because there's an understanding that the way we dance is just dancing, right? They have that understanding based on where they're from, right? That a woman dancing in a certain way is not suggestive. In the Black clubs, a lot of African Americans do not understand that because they associate certain ways of dress and certain ways of presentation as looking for attention and wanting to be and be approached in that way. And so there are women who are lucky, fortunate to be in spaces where the men, where the men who they know respect them. Great. I'm surrounded by men who respect me all the time. But I know when I step out to those spaces, I cannot say the same. And so for me, it's, what is the problem? What is it that's triggering this? And that's why I ask these questions.
And I think questions are important to ask when we're talking about shifting perspectives. Because without the questions, then we're not diving any deeper than the surface level of, oh, now I see all these Black women with natural hair. Remember that at ASU, I think that it was a lot of those women and the African Students Associations who had the dreadlocks and who had the natural hair. And I had not had that exposure growing up because I grew up in a very conservative African American church community that valued appearance. And so for me, seeing that and being in those spaces, I think that that's the other difference is oftentimes with Black women who have a certain way of dressing, I would say that aligns more so with yourself. They tend to surround themselves with women who support that idea, and they've had those spaces where that freedom was allowed. So I was lucky enough to grow up in a home where I saw successful women with successful relationships navigate the world and do so in an incredibly classy way. And so I've been able to model that. I've had those models, and those were really important to how I even push out myself into the world today. Do I travel and wear bikinis and wear cutoffs? Absolutely. But at the same time, it depends on the space in which I'm at.
Exactly.
I'm not just hanging out in the gas. Those are very specific spaces. Just like I would not go to church in pants because that is just somewhere where I feel like a certain dress code applies. I would not go to work in certain things, just like I would not wear a suit to go have drinks at a bar. To me, there's just this idea of decorum that is missing. When I think about freedom and agency in fashion, I see it as being freedom and agency in speech. And we all know the phrase, freedom is not void of consequence. And that also includes how people perceive or receive what you say and do, and what you look like. Just because you feel that people should treat you with decency based off of how you dress doesn't mean that's going to be what is happening. You cannot attack people for their perception on what you chose to present. I cannot go out into the world yelling racist things and having people say, nope, you got to go, kicking you out, and saying, well, I have the freedom. Yeah, you do, but you can't have that freedom in this space. Yeah. And having the freedom to dress however you want has become very, I would say, at the forefront. One of the conversations I had prior to leaving the classroom with the leadership team was, how do we address dress code? Should we be allowing certain things? If so, why not? So we had to talk about the economics of fashion. What was available, what was affordable. And so we even compared, is it cheaper to have a crop top than a regular shirt? Sometimes not. Should we be trivializing it? Should there be a separation in gender norms for dress? Personally, I don't think there should be a separation in gender norms for dress. I feel like the expectations for women should be the expectations for men. If we're asking women to wear closed-toe shoes, the men should have to wear closed-toe shoes. If you're asking me, telling me I have to cover up my midriff and my cleavage, then men should have to pull up their pants. And I have a strong belief in having the equity within discussing dress. And I think that that's been, particularly African American community, a priority, is addressing the equity within it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'll push back on that though, because when the saggy pants was popular, I don't know if it still is, right? But when the saggy
jeans with that sag, and that makes it even harder to run. So I don't understand.
I don't know how you exactly. I don't know how men can even walk with the saggy pants. But people did make comments about it. And so I think in various degrees, we do police the men, but not as much as the women. I must agree. I must agree on that part.
Little girls, I feel like little girls' bodies, particularly Black girls, they're so over-sexualized. And I think that that's where the shift from the conversation that you and I had last versus this conversation is there are tropes that Black women are trying to fight against. There is no middle ground. We're either being told that we're too masculine or we're too exposed. And so, to what degree does agency give us the freedom to meet somewhere in the middle?
Um, that's a good question, right? And so I am thinking to other more traditional cultures, right? Where there are expectations and value systems that direct how a woman should dress and present herself. And what kind of agency would women have within those spaces, right? Your what is expected is what is expected. And having those expectation, how does that disempower a woman, right? For me, it's there's so many other issues that really affect the woman than her being able to wear clothing in a sexualized society that exposes her breasts and her butt, right? Like we should be attacking the system, because until we live in a system, I firmly believe, where the woman is seen beyond her performance at the pleasures of the man, right? Until we live in a society where a woman can walk the streets and not fear that she's going to be raped, I think then is when we can have conversation of, hey, I should have the freedom to do what I want to do, right? But I don't feel as though we're in a society where we can have that conversation, because we are the ones that end up hurt. We are the ones that end up hurt because we are, we're trying to create, we have a mindset that goes totally against what is created for us as women. Am I wrong in some way in saying that?
I wouldn't say wrong. I think that when we look at how we navigate culture and the expectations and entering into larger spaces and the potential for danger, I strongly believe that yes, we should be teaching our boys to respect women, regardless of what they're wearing. That going
Yes.
out and raping women is it's not what we do. We don't harass. We don't
Correct.
you take no for as a no. But until then, we have to be able to navigate the world safely. I would never want a woman to put herself in a situation where there's a miscommunication as to what her intentions are. And so I think that becomes that dialogue. One of the things that I've learned through activism is breaking the law does not change the law. So going against the standard and going against the grain doesn't always warrant the change that you want. So do I wish I could wear the cat suits all the time? Absolutely. I look great in cat suits. Yes, I do. So, but I can't.
Yes, you do.
I mean, I really can't, because I'm a professional. I can't do that. And I want people to respect me, and I want people to hear me. And when you're shaped like someone like I am, and you're living the skin as someone like I am,
Yeah.
you're already in an uphill battle for respect. You're already in an uphill battle to be heard.
Yep.
And the disheartening part about the comments regarding fashion and decency was the silencing that happened from people outside the community who felt that their views on fashion trumped your understanding of your culture and your level of standard when it comes to dress. Mm-hmm. And the political aspect and the activism of what it means to have decency and standards through fashion. There is a rebellion today, in my opinion, to dress with decency. It's kind of one of those things where you're either considered boring or a man if you don't dress a certain way, or you don't look like you have the BBLs. And it's one of those things where it's kind of maddening, because you put a lot of effort into appearance.
Yeah.
Just to be treated like you didn't.
Yeah. It's mind blowing. It's mind blowing. And so for me, the silencing is concerning. I received a lot of text messages and phone calls after, and they all were supportive, but half of them were you need to continue having this conversation. It's important. It's important for the community. And then there is the other side where don't even bother. It doesn't make, like it's a losing battle, right? And just don't worry about it. And for me, I think that is it's scary because we're sliding in the direction of anything goes within a society where anything should not go. Right? And so as Black women, we have so much to deal with already, right? We have so much that's stacked against us. And so to move in the naivete that this free agency that we should have, right, benefits us. For me, it's false, right? It's false. And so for me, it's looking down the line. How does this help in the elevation of Black women? Like, where do we see ourselves? Do we see ourselves as divine? Do we see ourselves as, as mothers of and queens? And like, how do we identify ourselves if that is the path that we're going, right? Do we see that we should still be perceived as such, right? With a sexualized society that we live in, wearing anything that we feel that we want to wear. Like, how do we, what's the reflection that we see in the mirror? Do we still, identify ourselves as such?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you remember this, but one of our SEL coaches used to do those color wheels with the different words for different types of emotions. And
I can stand it, but yes.
I love those things, but it's like maddening at the same time.
Yes.
But I feel like our vocabulary has to shift when it comes to how we define things and how we address things. I know you address what is decency, what is feminism, what is womanism, and how do those things intersect or dissect. For me, understanding the difference between sexy and provocative.
Exactly.
There's exactly. A mass. I know I'm sexy. I carry myself sexy. I know I have a sway. I know what I am. I don't have to show it off. I don't need to be provocative for attention.
Exactly.
I've never had to deal with that. But at the same time, I know I have a provocative shape. And so I dress in a way that can convey sexy without being provocative. There's a way in which we can do that. And I think there's power in understanding that. It's one thing to have agency of body and want to show it off. Kudos to you. If you are that comfortable with your body and you feel like that's the way you're going to get your message across, that's awesome. However, from my perspective, I feel sexier when I can command the attention of someone without having to show it off. Because it takes very little to get attention when it's all hanging out.
Exactly. Yeah.
More effort. It takes even more divinity in order to get attention when you're dressed in a way that covers, that gives illusion. I love to dress for illusion. You may not ever see my skin color, but I tell you what, I have a lot of chocolate browns and I have shades of brown all throughout my wardrobe because I do feel like it's a very provocative color on Black women. But when you're fully covered and you have brown on, it gives this a beautiful, sexy overtone, especially when you have your natural hair and everything is toned down and it's not with the spider lashes and all that. When you take those things away and strip it back, the sexiest thing you can do is be bare. But while being covered.
While being covered.
And so many people are just out there in the world looking for and craving that attention. And half the time I just look at them and think, I just want to hug you. Because no one gave you that lesson in being sexy without being provocative.
Exactly. And is it that we're trying, like, why are we trying to be provocative, right? Women, we dress based on how we feel, right? We don't dress really unless we're like married or trying to get the attention of someone in particular. For the most part, we dress based on how we feel. And so when we're dressing provocative, knowing that you're going to walk into a room to get attention, right? Are you really saying that you really believe that the attention that you're going to get is going to be more of a respectable attention, right? So because a lot of the responses that I got in the comments is, I could go naked, right? I want to wear whatever I want to wear. I want it all hang out. And for me, it's why, like, what, 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 what are we trying to say? Like,
What are you trying to accomplish by
what are
doing
you
it?
trying to accomplish, really? To just why?
And see, for me, because I know women who have been strippers, who have worked as exotic dancers. I even know women who were sex workers and have done so out of necessity. And so I would never shame a woman for choosing a lifestyle that needs for you to be provocative.
And
But
exactly,
to
about that.
take
There's a space for that,
provocative,
though. There's a
yeah,
space for that.
and so to take that and place it in a space where it's not necessary
Exactly.
is why I question intention. Because to say, yeah, I can walk around naked, I can walk around looking like this, and then say, but I demand that you treat me a certain way. I demand that you not look at my body and look me in my eye. For
It's
me, that's
confusing.
unrealistic and it's ill-informed. It reeks of audacity. And this idea that, and it, like you said, it's so self-absorbed, so self-centered that you forget that you live in a society where certain things are acceptable and other things are not. And so for me, I could never shame a woman for choosing to be provocative, but it's for me, I want to know why.
Why?
Are
Why?
you, is it your economic stream in which you kind of have to? Because I will never shame a woman who chooses sex work because I feel like that is a legitimate career, if done so safely. At the same time, you can't go and be the teacher with the overtly like boobs all out. I mean, I've had to, my first year teaching, had to change how I dressed because I realized that no matter how many times I tell my 8th grade boys it's inappropriate, they're still 8th grade boys.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so those pictures are still going to be floating around on Instagram because they're 8th grade boys.
Yeah.
To demand respect is one thing, but try to force respect is another.
And that's what's happening, right? That's what's happening. It's, you're gonna respect me despite whatever. And so so that's where, there's gonna be friction and there's gonna be confusion on the parts of people like me who clearly, I'm old fashioned, and on the parts of some men, right? So there's a particular comment here that says, his opinion only matters when he's talking to his woman. It has no bearing on women he doesn't know. Why do men need a voice about women in a feminine aspect? It isn't necessary for men to voice an opinion about women in a woman's space.
And that's fair. That's a fair opinion. However, like they said, they're talking about it from a feminist viewpoint. And from a feminist viewpoint, yeah, there is the silencing of the male voice. But when we talk about being a womanist, it's inclusive of the male voice because it helps to navigate the community.
Exactly.
And you talk about childbearing and economic growth and community development. You can't do that without the male perspective. So it is fair to eliminate the male voice within the scope of feminism, but not from the scope of womanism.
No, and I think that's dangerous, right? It's dangerous, ignoring the man's voice, because as you said, we are in the same community, right? And just as much as we want to be heard, just as much as our thoughts and emotions need to be considered by the male, why is it that we feel that how the man's feelings and his opinions are irrelevant, right? Is there a time in which a man should consider our thoughts and emotions irrelevant? No, that's like an actual question I'm asking.
Yeah, I feel like yes. I mean, we want to be heard, right?
We want to be heard all
So
the time.
what man wouldn't want to be heard too?
Exactly.
I tote on the line because I strongly believe that these are just philosophies and ideologies. They're not lifestyles, in my opinion. At least feminism is not. Womanism tends to align more towards being a lifestyle than anything else, whereas feminism is more of a political ideology. And so when we talk about voice, when we talk like down to the abortion conversation, do I think men should be a part of that conversation?
Definitely.
It's not something that has bearing on them, even though they feel like they should have a say. I get that. You might feel like you have a say. That does not mean you need to say it. However, if you look at that if we create a political framework from womanism, that even in the abortion talk, men have a voice, where it says, and I would hope any man who aligns with being a womanist would say, you know what? I am here to support your objective with wanting this or not wanting this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for the most part in the last 20 years, feminism has become less objective driven and more socially driven. When feminism began, it was for economic, social, and political advancement.
Yeah.
And so now most of those things have been stripped back based off of the amazing efforts of amazing women doing the groundwork. And I think women still have a long way to go, but are the battles really there? And that's what my question is always. Are you really arguing whether or not a man has an opinion? Yeah, he has an opinion. He's allowed to have that opinion. But does he have the right to then turn around and take that opinion and utilize his position of power to force his opinion? That's where the difference is.
Exactly. That's where the difference
is. To have that opinion, but the use of power is where the issue comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And thanks for saying that, right? Thanks for saying that. And I think there is, like women historically have had reasons as you've explained, right, for feeling the way they feel when it comes to agency and rights, right? But I feel as though we've shifted to a point where, where are our complaints, right? Where do these movements lie right now? What's the battle? I think the battle is reproductive rights, right? I had a full panel conversation on Roe v. Wade and reproductive rights, right? And so that is an important issue, but it's the direction that is intentional, as you said, for where along the lines of feminism. I feel as though we're grasping right now. We're grasping at straws, and it's not anything based on anything really political and significant in any way.
But the reproduction argument, fashion has become a part of it. If we look at the social media posts of she wants to go out and party and sleep with whoever she wants, because she knows she could just have an abortion. That's not the reality of it. It really isn't. Most of those women are on birth control and they're not getting pregnant. It's other women who are in committed relationships who realize, like, economically or for the viability of their own bodies, that they don't want a child.
That is true.
That has become a part of that discourse. Where they're putting up the woman with the BBL, with the cutoff shorts, the crop tops, and the high heels, and the spider eyelashes. I don't know how else to describe them.
Look, I feel the same way about them. So yes,
the over exaggeration. Yeah, and they put that up there as the poster for why they're against something, which is now politicized, and in reality is economic, because pregnancy and delivery in itself is economic. And I think that people stop having that conversation. And so now when we talk about male voices, they're using these images against us in a political way.
Okay, when you say they, who's they? They're using the image.
When we open up the conversation to men, when we say that men should be allowed to be a part of the conversation, well, guess what? They are, and they're a part of the conversation through voting.
In a different,
part of the conversation through leadership.
Yeah, in a different way, right? In a way that's not necessarily helpful. And so that's why it's even important that we intentional about bringing them into the conversation, because where they're having these dialogues, it's not productive from
And
our
it tends to be
perspective.
void of women, and particularly women that look like us.
Yes, yes, yep. And so that's why it's so important that we're inclusive, because we're shaping the way we move in this space based on our own narrative and our own conversations we're having with each other, and missing each other completely, right? Misunderstanding each other completely without that necessary communication. So that, I'm just responding to that comment about the men having a voice. And then the last one: Black people are not a monolith, and it's unfair to try to make people fit in your box because it's what makes you comfortable. I agree, Black people, we are not a monolith. Um, but I'm not quite sure what the box we were speaking of. Is it the box of the question of decency and standard and what that looks like? Because that's the overarching question, right? The overarching question is, how do we present ourselves in a public space as Black women, right? And should we be allowed to have free agency? And what would be the repercussions of that? So again, that comment pushes back on my question, as in, do we have what is considered expectations of how we present ourselves based on the space we're in? I don't know if you want to follow up with that.
Yeah, I'm always going to look at these conversations from a historical and academic side. And so when I look at it, I'm looking at it from the general stereotypes in which Black women have had to fight against, particularly in Western cultures. We are not a monolith. We fully understand that. I don't think that it has to be continuously announced. We fully understand that, but do we have the same agency as others? No, we do not. Because we are still fighting those nuances and those tropes and those narratives that we're either too masculine or too provocative. And so for me, I don't think it's necessary. Yes, is there a box? Absolutely. I strongly feel like there is a box. Is it the box we created? Absolutely not. And so for me, choosing to dress in a way that reflects the space in which I am, that is my freedom. That I'm not forced to wear certain things, rather it's being modest or being provocative. I'm not forced to do those things. I do so by choice. Oftentimes, Black women lack agency, and we feel like we have it. It's this misconception that is there. When in reality, when we look at how Black women are promoted online and through the media and through economic growth and who gets represented where, there is a message as to what we should look like and how we should act. And we start to put ourselves in a box. And I'm not sure where this idea that somehow aligning with certain other groups gives you some type of freedom that others who choose to align with more of an Afrocentric or a Pan-African ideology.
Yeah.
That to me is mind-boggling, and it's a little off-putting when people say, "Well, we're monolithic, we're non-monolithic, or we're
monolith."
Yeah, and so what I tend to hear with that is, I don't want to be a part of this group. And so I'm going to push against the grain as much as I possibly can in order to separate myself. And we have to ask ourselves, are we doing this collectively? And are we in this together? Or do we need to keep our distance from certain groups? And I hate that idea, especially coming from Arizona, where we're already such a small community.
Yeah.
Are we all different? Absolutely. I think you and I differ incredibly. And I'm going to assume that most people in the comments probably think that we're incredibly similar. No, we are not. Me and Zoe have had some very deep conversations about various topics that differ. And that is coming from her viewpoint being a non-African American in terms of being Black American, versus me being raised here and my family literally being about 6 generations into this country. And so that the perspective is different. And so I wanted to have these dialogues within the realm of historical relevance and academic prowess.
Yeah.
It's not enough to say, I'm going to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Because I do whatever I want. I want to know the why. I wish that there were more questions in your comments when with your post. I mean, because I had questions, I saw it, but I was in Sholo and on a horse, so I couldn't.
Living your best life.
But I feel like if questions were asked, then you would have had the opportunity to
Explain
your perspective of African fashion and how it is being utilized from an advocacy stance for women and understanding femininity.
Yeah. And thanks for that. And that's going to segue into my closing remarks, right? Because I come from a perspective of the world that I live in, right? It's a very much Afrocentric world, right? And the I wouldn't want to say the ideology, but the historical relevance and importance of the place of the woman and how she's seen and respected and received flies in the face of what is unfolding in our society right now, right? And so I'm in the space of an Afrocentric fashion world, right? I work closely with models, I observe them very closely. And so for me, observing the direction we're going, and when we speak of agency, even within that agency, what does these styles say of who we are, right? Because I'm all about returning to our true cultural ancestry. These fashion statements says nothing about who we are as a culture and as a people. And so and so for me, it's concerning because it's, yes, we're westernized. I'm westernized too. I was not born in Africa, right? And so we have that connection to Western style and fashion. But I feel like if it's pulling us away from again, using that word of the essence of being a Black woman, right? We're trendsetters. We are. And we make things fashionable. And so, with that understanding, what are the trends that we're making fashionable, right? What are the trends that we're perpetuating, right? And so, for me, is I would rather it be something much more culturally centered, family centered and grounded, with the whole community in mind, and not the individualistic autonomous way of approaching our style, because we do not live in a community, in a society of our own, right? And so I come from that perspective. And also the fact, like, I'm starting, and this is where I'm going to make this public announcement, a model agency, right? It's for the most part a model agency targeting for Black models, because Black models do not get the recognition that they deserve within the space of fashion in Arizona, to what I believe. And so all the models that I've reached out to, they loved it, they're excited, they want to be a part of it. And so I want to, I want to use the fashion and the industry and these beautiful models to elevate their pride, but in what space and in what context. And so if we're going in the direction of to me, not having any level of standards and expectation, where does that leave us, right? For those who are the curators of fashion and style, right? For those who are grounded in culture, for those who are connected to our Afrocentricity, what does that mean for us? And how do we place ourselves in these spaces? So I'm gonna have you. So that's where I am in this conversation. It's larger than just wanting to control women. Trust me, it's deeper than that. But I want you to, if you have any closing words, and then we can end it up, wrap it up for tonight.
I just want to leave it with understanding that fashion, particularly for Black women, is a historical battle. From being forced into certain styles, into trying to reclaim ourselves. And so I would hope that women, particularly Black women, would look at, just because you choose to dress a certain way and you're claiming that others are forcing you to into modesty, well, maybe what you're forced, you assume other people are forcing you into, is not the reality. So when I read Zoe's comment, I did not take offense, because I have nieces that dress in a way that I probably wouldn't. But to try to force her to change her opinion based off of your own desires for individual freedom, is something that you might want to dive into and figure out what your intentions were when presenting yourself out into the world.
Yeah, yeah. That's big. That's key. That's key. But thank you for that. Thank you for that, Victoria. Thank you for jumping on literally last minute. I appreciate you.
Always.
For joining me on this conversation and this important topic. And I do plan on having another guest next week. Not so much in fashion, but the larger conversation on womanhood and femininity. Seeing that I had a conversation about manhood, fatherhood, and masculinity a few weeks ago, and we got a lot of questions as to when we're going to have a follow up and where we're going to talk about the women. So my goal is to have this follow up conversation next week with someone who can talk about femininity, motherhood, and womanhood, to follow up the conversation we had in masculinity. So thank you everyone for listening, being a part of the conversation, your contributions. Sorry, I came out a little bit passionate about this topic, because there's several layers, but there are reasons why I've been so passionate about this particular topic. There's still love, and I just hope that we continue to have these conversations, because it's absolutely important, and many of the reasons we discussed this evening. So I'm going to end it off tonight. I have two of my models waiting on me outside, and I will meet up with you again next week. All right, bye everybody.